There is a type of person who walks into a room and without saying a single correct word exposes everything everyone is trying to hide, not through aggression, not through logic, but through something far more unsettling, truth disguised as play, and most people don't realize it until it's already happening to them. What if your humor, your emotional intensity, and your ability to disturb people's comfort were not flaws at all, but signs of something extremely rare, a psychological pattern so unusual that it turns emotional perception itself into a mirror for others? Before we go deeper, pause for a second. If you've ever felt that people react to you more than necessary, or that your presence disrupts emotional illusions without effort, subscribe, because what comes next may explain patterns you've been misinterpreting your entire life. The first sign is inversion of emotional expectation, and it is far more subtle than simply behaving opposite on purpose. It operates like an automatic psychological response where your emotional expression does not follow the predictable social script of the environment you are in. Most people unconsciously synchronize with the dominant mood of a room. If it is serious, they become serious. If it is playful, they loosen up. But in this pattern, your system reacts through contrast rather than alignment. When tension rises, instead of becoming tense in the same direction, something in you introduces lightness. When seriousness dominates, humor or irony may surface without conscious planning. This is not performed behavior. It feels as if the emotional current passes through you and exits in a transformed form, almost like a translation error in social reality that still somehow makes sense. Psychologically, this can be understood as a form of high-sensitivity emotional processing combined with low conformity to external affective cues. You are not ignoring the environment. You are processing it too deeply and too quickly for direct imitation to feel natural. Instead of copying emotion, your mind reorganizes it. So if a group is suppressing discomfort, you might unintentionally express a playful remark that exposes that discomfort indirectly. If someone is trying to maintain control in a tense situation, your presence may introduce unpredictability that breaks their rigid emotional structure. This is why people sometimes react to you with laughter that feels slightly nervous, or silence that feels unusually heavy. On a deeper level, this inversion creates a mirror effect. You are not reflecting what people show, but what they are avoiding. That is why your response often feels wrong to the situation but emotionally accurate to the underlying truth. You are not reacting to the surface layer of behavior, but to the hidden emotional layer beneath it. Because of this, others may feel slightly exposed around you without being able to explain why. The inversion is not a conscious strategy. It is a byproduct of an internal system that processes emotional reality through contrast, revealing what is unspoken by refusing to match what is visible. The second sign is involuntary truth activation, where your presence seems to loosen the psychological filters people normally rely on to control what they reveal. In everyday interaction, most individuals operate with a kind of internal editing system. Thoughts, impulses, emotions, and memories are constantly being sorted into what is safe to express and what must remain hidden. This filter is usually stable, reinforced by social norms, fear of judgment, and learned self-control. But in your presence, that stability appears to weaken without any obvious trigger. What makes this phenomenon unusual is that you are not actively extracting information. You are not interrogating, persuading, or even directing conversation towards sensitive areas. Yet people begin to disclose more than they intended, sometimes even surprising themselves. They may say things they had no plan to share or suddenly shift into honesty that feels slightly unplanned. It can appear as emotional leakage, where the boundary between internal thought and spoken language becomes thinner. From a psychological perspective, this can be interpreted as a disruption of self-monitoring processes. Human beings constantly adjust their behavior based on perceived safety and emotional resonance. When someone unconsciously feels that they are being seen beyond surface identity, the internal pressure to maintain a curated self-image can weaken. Your presence may unintentionally signal a level of perceptual depth that bypasses superficial social performance. As a result, the mind stops investing as much energy in maintaining masks and begins to release stored or suppressed material. This does not always lead to positive or comfortable interactions. Sometimes the truths that surface are awkward, emotionally charged, or poorly timed. People may feel exposed after speaking, even if nothing inappropriate was said. They might attempt to retract or reframe their words because the act of revealing felt involuntary. This is where the confusion arises. They cannot clearly identify what about the interaction made them so open. At the core of this sign is not control over others, but the effect of perceptual intensity. When someone feels unconsciously perceived at a deeper level than usual, their psychological defenses begin to reorganize in real time. Instead of carefully managing identity, they begin revealing fragments of internal reality that normally stay hidden, as if your presence temporarily lowers the threshold between thought and expression, making truth emerge faster than intention can restrain it. The third sign is emotional dual processing, where your internal emotional experience and your external expression operate on two completely different channels at the same time, almost as if they are not governed by the same system. On the inside, you may feel emotional intensity very strongly, sometimes even more than the people around you, but on the outside, what others perceive is often something entirely different. Calm detachment, humor, unpredictability, or even playful disruption. This creates a constant mismatch between what you feel and what others assume you feel. This isn't intentional masking. It is more like simultaneous translation of emotional input into multiple outputs. One layer absorbs the emotional reality in full depth, while another layer immediately converts it into a form that is socially survivable or symbolically expressive. So, when emotional pressure rises, instead of showing direct distress, it might emerge as sarcasm, light humor, or a sudden shift in tone that confuses others. They may interpret it as lack of seriousness, but internally, the processing is often extremely intense and continuous. From a psychological angle, this can resemble heightened emotional cognition paired with dissociation from automatic expression. In simpler terms, your mind does not allow raw emotion to spill directly into behavior without transformation. It gets filtered, reshaped, and recoded before it becomes visible. Because of this, people around you rarely receive an accurate emotional read of what you are actually experiencing. They see the output, not the input. This dual-layer processing often leads to misunderstanding. Some may assume you are unaffected by emotional situations because your outward response is controlled or even humorous. Others may think you are unpredictable because your reactions do not follow expected emotional logic. But internally, there is usually continuous awareness of emotional depth that is not being displayed directly. Over time, this creates a unique social effect. You become difficult to emotionally categorize. People cannot reliably predict how you will respond to emotionally charged situations because your external behavior is not a direct reflection of your internal state. Instead, it is a transformed version of it. The emotion does not disappear. It is converted into something else before it reaches the surface, creating the impression that you are both highly sensitive and strangely untouchable at the same time. The fourth sign is discomfort without hostility, where people feel an unexplained uneasiness around you even though nothing objectively negative is happening in the interaction. You are not attacking, criticizing, or challenging them in an obvious way, yet something in your presence creates a subtle internal tension. It is not fear in a direct sense, and it is not dislike either. It is more like a psychological friction that appears when someone feels observed at a level deeper than their usual social identity. What makes this effect so confusing for others is that your behavior may remain completely neutral or even friendly. You can be smiling, speaking casually, or simply listening, yet the emotional response you trigger in them does not match the surface situation. This mismatch creates cognitive dissonance. Their conscious mind registers safety, but their unconscious emotional system registers exposure. That contradiction produces discomfort that has no clear source, which is why people often struggle to explain what they are feeling. From a psychological perspective, this can be linked to the way humans constantly manage self-image. Every person maintains a socially constructed version of themselves that is presented to the world. This version is stable when interactions feel predictable and non-intrusive. However, when someone is perceived, consciously or unconsciously, as seeing beyond that constructed layer, the mind begins to feel uncovered. Not because anything private has been revealed, but because the presence feels like it could reveal it at any moment. Your role in this dynamic is not active exposure, but passive amplification of awareness. You may notice details in tone, behavior, or emotional inconsistencies that others overlook. And even if you do not verbalize them, your perception alone can influence how others feel about themselves. People are highly sensitive to being emotionally read, even when no direct judgment is expressed. This is why the discomfort is often accompanied by restlessness, overthinking, or sudden shifts in behavior from the other person. They may become quieter, more controlled, or unusually talkative, trying to stabilize how they are being perceived. The key element here is that the discomfort is not caused by what you do, but by what your presence seems capable of revealing. It creates a silent awareness in others that their inner state is not as hidden as they assumed, and that alone is enough to disturb emotional equilibrium without any confrontation at all. The fifth sign is pattern disruption, where your presence seems to interfere with the normal emotional flow of people and situations, not by force, but by altering how predictable reactions unfold. Most social environments run on unconscious scripts. People know how to behave in meetings, friendships, arguments, and even silence. These patterns create a sense of stability because everyone is subtly following an unspoken structure. But when you enter that structure, something about the predictability begins to loosen. It often starts small. A conversation that should follow a familiar rhythm suddenly shifts direction. A serious moment may take an unexpected turn into humor or introspection. A light interaction might suddenly deepen without clear reason. It feels as if the emotional script is still there, but it is no longer being followed smoothly. People may hesitate mid-sentence, change their tone, or become unusually self-aware, as though they are monitoring themselves more closely than usual. Psychologically, this can be understood as increased meta-awareness in others triggered by your behavioral unpredictability. You are not behaving randomly, but you are not conforming to expected emotional sequences either. That deviation forces people to become more conscious of what they are doing in real time. Instead of acting automatically, they begin to observe themselves acting. And when a person becomes aware of their own emotional script, the script itself starts to break down. This is why some people may describe interactions with you as different without being able to define how. It is not that you are directly changing them, but that you are disrupting the automaticity of their responses. They can no longer rely on habitual emotional patterns because the interaction no longer follows predictable progression. This creates moments of hesitation, reflection, or sudden shifts in energy. In some cases, this disruption can feel uncomfortable to others because it removes the safety of predictability. Humans often rely on social repetition to feel emotionally secure. When that repetition is interrupted, even gently, it creates a sense of instability. Yet, at the same time, it can also lead to moments of clarity where people become more aware of what they are actually feeling instead of what they are supposed to feel. At its core, this sign is not about chaos or unpredictability for its own sake. It is about how your presence alters the automatic flow of emotional behavior, making people temporarily step outside their usual patterns and confront the fact that their reactions are not fixed, but conditioned and easily reshaped by the context around them. The sixth sign is energetic saturation, where your nervous system absorbs emotional states from your environment so quickly and so deeply that you rarely experience interactions as neutral. In most people, emotional input is filtered, delayed, and selectively processed. They can sit in a room filled with tension or excitement and still maintain a stable internal baseline. But in your case, emotional atmosphere seems to enter directly, without much resistance, as if the boundary between you and the environment is thinner than usual. This does not mean you are constantly overwhelmed in a visible way. In fact, what others often see is the opposite. Instead of outward emotional overload, the absorbed energy gets transformed internally into something else: thought clarity, sudden humor, silence, or unexpected insight. It is as if raw emotional data is immediately converted into another form before it can settle as a stable mood. A tense environment might not make you visibly tense, but it could produce sharper awareness, faster thinking, or an unusual detachment that others misinterpret. Because of this rapid absorption, your emotional state may shift without obvious external triggers. A conversation can feel fine on the surface, yet internally it carries weight that others do not perceive. Later, that weight may release not as emotional expression in the same form it entered, but as reinterpretation, realizations, re-evaluations, or a sudden shift in how you understand what just happened. The emotion is not stored in its original shape. It is processed, dissolved, and reassembled into something cognitively different. This is also why people around you may feel seen or felt, even when you say very little. You are not reacting to them in a slow, analytical way. You are absorbing the emotional field they create, which can subtly influence how you respond, even if you do not verbalize it. They may sense that their internal state has been registered, even if nothing explicit was said about it. Over time, this creates a unique internal rhythm: intake without delay, transformation without pause, and expression that does not always match the original emotional source. It can make you appear calm in situations where others expect emotional reaction, or strangely insightful in moments where nothing obvious was discussed, because the processing is happening beneath the level of visible expression rather than through it. The seventh sign is isolation through perception, where the most defining experience is not lack of people around you, but the feeling that your way of perceiving emotional reality does not fully align with anyone else's. You can be surrounded, engaged, even understood on a surface level, yet still experience a subtle distance that is difficult to name. It is not loneliness in the simple sense of being alone. It is the recognition that your internal processing of emotional reality operates on a slightly different frequency than the people you interact with. This happens because your attention does not stay on surface behavior for long. While most people process emotions through direct social cues, tone, words, expressions, you tend to register deeper inconsistencies, emotional undercurrents, and contradictions between what is said and what is actually felt. This creates a form of perception that is more layered and less linear. As a result, conversations that feel complete to others may feel incomplete to you, as if there is always another layer running beneath what is being expressed. Because of this depth of perception, mutual emotional synchronization becomes rare. People may enjoy your presence, feel understood, or even feel emotionally stimulated by you, but they may not fully follow how you are experiencing the interaction internally. And you may experience the same gap in reverse. You can understand them, sometimes more than they understand themselves, but still feel that something is not fully shared at the level of perception. Psychologically, this can create a quiet form of separation. Not rejection, not exclusion, but a persistent awareness that your internal map of emotional reality includes details that others are not actively registering. Over time, this can lead to selective connection, where only certain individuals feel capable of matching your depth, while most interactions remain partially surface-bound. This does not mean connection is impossible, but it often requires others to slow down their usual emotional processing to meet you at a more reflective level. Without that adjustment, interactions can feel slightly asynchronous, like two systems running at different speeds. At its core, this sign is about perceptual divergence. You are not disconnected from people. You are connected through a lens that interprets emotional reality with more layers than most systems are built to process directly. And that difference alone creates the quiet feeling of standing slightly apart, even while standing among others. The eighth sign is the duality of chaos and healing energy, where your presence can simultaneously disrupt emotional stability and create clarity, depending on what the situation requires. This is not a controlled choice you make in the moment, but an adaptive shift that seems to happen through you. In one context, you may appear to unsettle people, break their emotional patterns, or trigger discomfort. In another, you may bring unexpected relief, insight, or emotional release without deliberately trying to comfort anyone. What makes this duality complex is that it is not consistent in a predictable way. You are not always the calm presence or always the chaotic one. Instead, your effect seems to respond to the emotional rigidity of the environment. When people are overly controlled, suppressed, or emotionally locked into rigid patterns, your presence may introduce disruption that breaks that structure. When people are emotionally overloaded, confused, or fragmented, your presence may instead bring grounding through clarity or unexpected understanding. From a psychological perspective, this can be seen as high emotional sensitivity combined with flexible social mirroring that is not linear. You do not stabilize or destabilize people in a fixed direction. You amplify what is already beneath the surface until it becomes visible. If suppression dominates, suppression cracks. If emotional overload dominates, it gets reorganized into meaning. This is why the same person may describe you in completely opposite ways depending on the moment they encountered you. This dual nature often leads to misunderstanding from others. Some may remember you as disruptive, intense, or hard to read. Others may remember you as deeply insightful, calming, or even healing. Both experiences can be true because the effect is not coming from a single fixed expression, but from interaction with the emotional state of the other person at that time. At a deeper level, this creates a paradoxical identity in perception. You are not experienced as one consistent emotional role, but as a shifting presence that reveals different aspects of people's internal world depending on what is most dominant in them at that moment. And because of that, people often remember not just how they felt around you, but how much of themselves they unexpectedly encountered in your presence.